Welcome to another installment of our 2020 Virtual Global and Community Engagement Conference, formerly known as D80. The conference is a dialogue and celebration of our efforts to solve issues that confront the world's poorest 80%. Traditionally, it's a one-day conference featuring multiple in-person panels and breakout sessions. This year, the conference is being delivered virtually throughout the month of October, including a lecture series, a rosé gallery exhibit, a walking tour, and a series of online interviews with local and global change makers throughout Michigan Tech's community. My name is Aprille Hibbard, and I'm a member of the conference planning committee. I'm also a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Moldova. I was a health education teacher, and I served from 2018 to 2020. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing two fellow RPCVs.
So my name is Bailey Pates. I am an RPCV from Sierra Leone. I worked in the education sector, and I'm currently here at Michigan Tech earning my environmental engineering degree.
Awesome.
I am Mattison Brady, also an RPCV from Ukraine. I was there 2009 to 2012. I was also a teacher. Our program was teaching English as a foreign language.
Awesome. So thank you guys so much for your time today. And we're going to jump right into the interview. So for our first question, if you could both please take a few minutes to tell me a little bit about your Peace Corps service. What was your role in your Peace Corps community? A little bit of background about your countries, whatever you'd like to give.
So I'll begin. So like I said, I served in Sierra Leone, which is a small coastal country in West Africa. I served from June 2019 to March 2020. So only 9 months. I was actually part of the global evacuation. There I worked as a high school science teacher for my village, Leone. It was a really small village, about 3,000 people. So I taught chemistry, biology, and physics to high school seniors and juniors. And then the village over actually had a college, the Canadian College of Modern Technology. So I taught a math course there a few nights a week. Yeah, so that was primarily what I did.
Awesome.
And I was in Eastern Ukraine from 2009 to 2012. So I was fortunate to avoid two different evacuations, actually. The first one when Russia invaded Ukraine, and the second one, obviously, they've started coming back into the country, all the places where they could reestablish sites safely. And of course, the pandemic happened. But my service was uninterrupted, which I'm very grateful for, obviously. And I was teaching sort of the equivalent of in a K to 12 school. I guess just went to 11 instead of 12. So that's how many forms they have. And then also working in a local community center at the library. So the core of the work was education, English as a foreign language, and then opportunities to do gender workshops and PEPFAR, which for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS Relief. So it's grant funding for little projects throughout the world that you can apply for, HIV/AIDS trainings, things like that.
Awesome. And yeah, like I said, I served in the Republic of Moldova. It's a very tiny little country in Eastern Europe, right next to Ukraine. And I taught health education and personal development. I taught health to grades 3 through 9 at the local elementary and middle schools, and personal development to the 3rd and 6th grades. I also hosted some health fairs and sports camps and English clubs, whatever I could kind of keep involved with while I was overseas. Okay, so what kind of projects did you guys work on while serving in the Peace Corps?
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to really get too many projects going just because I was only there for 9 months. And if you know anything about Peace Corps service, the first 3 months is training, and then I had 6 months at site. So outside of just teaching at the high school and the Canadian College, my counterpart, which your counterpart is someone that you choose to work with on projects within your village, his name was Luis, and he had created a women's finance organization. So his goal was to help women save so that they could then move out of the profession of farming and actually start being businesswomen and start opening their own shops. So he wanted to have me help him come up with like finance workshops for the women, just so they could learn some skills on like how to do a business risk assessment and just, you know, what to choose, what to sell and stuff like that. Also just how to save money, how to make a budget, that kind of stuff. So I worked with the non-governmental organization One Village, and they had actually already made like a business women's workshop for illiterate women, because the women in my village unfortunately were not able to go to high school or even primary school because of the Civil War. So Sierra Leone had a pretty crazy civil war for about 10 years, so that shut down most of the schools. So I helped in developing a workshop for that. Fortunately, it was set to have the workshop in April, and I was evacuated in March. So everything was all lined up, but we weren't able to actually give the workshop. So that was kind of very sad, honestly, very tragic. But I was told that he was actually able to hold the workshop this last Saturday. So the women were able to get the information and everything, which was really cool to hear.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was like pretty much my main side project aside from teaching.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Mattison?
Yeah, I mentioned in the last one actually, but sort of the main ongoing side project was working, doing some cultural programming at the local library and community center. And with them, actually, we applied for, there's one other sort of source of easy funding for Peace Corps volunteers, or at least there was then, small projects assistance grants. Did you guys have those?
Yep.
So yeah, we got one of those off the ground for to do a gender training in a small resource center there. And then for PEPFAR, that was actually a sort of a regional initiative. So a number of volunteers coordinated to put a training together to bring in actual experts, because we weren't that, to do a training for trainers. So basically people that were associated with our sites could apply to come to the training, and we sort of all go en masse. And I actually forget what town we were in for that, but it was one of the nearby regional capitals. And I hadn't mentioned before, but I was in a town called Konstantinovka, which is just outside of Donetsk in the east of Ukraine.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. And while I was in my service, in my second year, actually working with a small grant, I did a project with my school to increase girls' participation in PE classes. So we did a Let Girls Learn grant through the Michelle Obama Foundation. A little information, a little background on Moldova. It's, you know, Moldova and Ukraine are very similar climates, all 4 seasons, really cold in the winter. And for my school, the infrastructure was not, it was poorly designed. So the gymnasium, although it was very spacious, very nice, it didn't get heated well. So it was about the same temperature inside as it was outside. So the cold season, which is October to April, the majority of the school year, the girls kind of refused to participate in their PE classes or their sports team events or anything like that. So we kind of just did a project to build back up the PE program, kind of fix the gym, all of the infrastructure problems. Similar to you, Bailey, it got put on hold because of the global pandemic, and we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. But I was fortunate enough to get through the majority of my project because it was in my second year. So there were some big things we had planned that we weren't able to do, but that was kind of my main focus in my second year of service. Okay, so how does your work or project connect with the mission of the GCEC conference? So the conference is a dialogue in celebration of our efforts to solve issues that confront the world's poorest 80%. And this year's theme of the conference is the pursuit of social equity and representation. So based on that theme and kind of the overall background on what the conference is, if you could kind of describe how your work or your project related in the Peace Corps associates with the mission of the conference.
Okay. So I kind of think there's like three ways that my work kind of related to that. So first and foremost, with my like project, working with the women's business organization, that was just to, give the women in the area skills that they missed because they weren't going to high school, but also to increase the participation of women that we do have working in business. And then another side goal of that was to empower women to kind of take a greater role in finances within their family, because in Sierra Leone, it's very, I guess, typical gender standards. Like the man is the breadwinner. So we wanted to kind of encourage women to kind of take more of finances in the household as well. And then as a teacher, I was actually the only female teacher at my high school, as well as the only female teacher at the Canadian college. So my students would constantly come up to me and be like, "Oh, it's so incredible that, you're a female, but like you're teaching science, because science is like a male dominated field and like math is too hard for women." So it was a nice opportunity to kind of just have an open dialogue about like, no, that's not true. There are not jobs that are like men jobs and jobs that are for women. We can both have both of them. So that was a continuous conversation that I would have not only with my students, but also with fellow teachers as well. And then to kind of make a little bit more equality in my classroom, I implemented 50-50. So if I called on a boy, then I had to call on a girl, and then the next person had to be a girl. And I found that when I first started, my female students would never come to the board. They would never raise their hand. And then after being forced to be cold called, towards the end of the semester, they were way more willing to come up to the board. And even without me like forcing them, they would want to come up to the board. So that was kind of a way that I could, as a female teacher, kind of encourage them, because a lot of the other male teachers kind of pushed the female students to the side and wanted to focus on just the male students. So those are kind of the three ways I feel like the conference kind of connected to my work.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And I'd say sort of connected, similar things for me in the work. I think English, the TEFL program in general, as a sort of skills transfer program is really valuable, because it's what can allow people in some ways to, I mean, it's not fair that it's English that's currently the international language right now, but because it is, it's a very valuable skill to bring to places like where I worked, which is very much a provincial town, really only connected to the nearby province capital. So English is kind of a prerequisite for both education and jobs in Kiev, the capital, but then also international education, international jobs. So just in terms of opportunity for a lot of the kids, education more broadly, but English specifically, were really valuable things for them moving forwards. And I don't want to steal from future question here, but I'm in touch with some of the kids that are using English going forwards. I have someone pursuing a degree right now in England, so it's not, those are things that are going to get as well from, they already had that education going on, but it was something I could plug into and help out with at least, which felt good. And then as far as PEPFAR, the story is the kind of the same it is anywhere, that the people worst hit by HIV and AIDS in Ukraine are marginalized groups. They're intravenous drug users, they're sex workers. And so it's a constant struggle, not just the struggle of resources and medical treatment, but the struggle of properly treating people who don't really fit into society very well. So that's a big struggle and a big thing to wrestle with anywhere in the world. Struggle with it here, obviously. But that was, I think, one way that sort of connected to the conference.
Yeah, definitely. I think for mine also, it kind of focused more on gender equitable practices and kind of representation, equal representation between the two. As a teacher, kind of, Bailey, you had mentioned this, and Mattison, you had also kind of touched on it. So for mine, where I did a project with physical education and sports, I made a main goal to kind of make sure I was not just focusing on the girls' participation, but also the boys. So we hosted a summer camp that was a sports camp, and I made sure to have equal signups for girls and boys. So for every girl, there was a boy that signed up, and just to kind of make it more equal and show them that It doesn't have to be a certain gender that's dominating physical education or sports in that country. And for mine, it was a little interesting because Moldova is a very female populated country, because most of the men either don't finish their middle school, or if they do finish middle school, they don't move on to high school. They immediately start working. And for them, they'll either work in their family's farms, or they'll move to a different country and send money back. So for the majority of the population, it's very female heavy, and kind of working with that, where the majority of my classes were girls, just trying to get the boys also involved in class and then the girls also involved in sports, kind of going back and forth just to make sure they're all getting everything they can get out of their education, kind of those kind of things. So we kind of all touched upon it a little bit, but how did you get involved with this kind of work, and how has it impacted you personally and the communities you serve? So maybe we can kind of touch upon how we all got involved with Peace Corps.
Okay. So I have a degree in chemical engineering, and I was a TA as an undergrad, and I absolutely love teaching, and I was just not ready to commit to a 9-to-5 job quite yet. So I found that the most useful thing I could probably do was to go and teach. So that was kind of why I was inspired to join the Peace Corps. But yeah, I feel like my work just directly relates to this. And then my counterpart was really the one that like pushed me to really joining this kind of work in my community. But as for how it impacted my community, so change is very slow. I think the best thing I could do was just to have an open dialogue with the male teachers and then also my community. If someone said something that was very sexist, I would always definitely make a comment about it, like, hey, like, we don't say that, or like, I don't appreciate when you say something like that to me. So I can't really say if they've changed their ways or anything, but at least it was an open dialogue, and they knew we were going to be having a lot of conversations about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fairly similar story. I was about a year or so out of college, but it was 2008, so the economy was not super hot. And I'd gone to University of Michigan, where there's a pretty heavy Peace Corps recruiting presence. So it was kind of in the back of my mind the whole time, sort of a dream of something I'd wanted to do. And I had studied Russian and studied abroad in Russia. So I had sort of this thought about trying to serve in a Russian-speaking part of the world. So I just figured I was working a job I didn't want to work at the time. I put the application in, and things went pretty fast after that, basically. And then as far as my community in Ukraine, I would say, I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of it comes down to my counterpart, she was fantastic. I think I was the second volunteer town had, and there was at least another one after me. But she's a real dynamo. So most of the change happening in that community was due in large part to her. And I definitely keep in touch with her. She's awesome. But
That's awesome. Yeah, kind of similar. I was in my junior year of undergrad, kind of critical time of got to make a decision on what I'm going to do next. And I had thought about doing Peace Corps when I was little, and then completely forgot about it. And it was just always stuck in the back of my head until someone mentioned it again. And I was like, oh, right, that's something I kind of wanted to do. So a recruiter came to my college and told me about the Peace Corps Masters International program, which unfortunately no longer exists, but I'm still enrolled in it, kind of got grandfathered into it, made the application right before it got discontinued. And it kind of really appealed to me to be able to get my master's degree while also serving in the Peace Corps. I did a lot of mission trips in undergrad, and it just kind of seemed like the perfect next step. Regarding my communities, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I wasn't really able to see if there was any change based on my project, but just kind of the demeanor of everyone kind of changed over the 2 years I was there were definitely, especially with my students, what is acceptable to kind of say to people, what isn't, kind of just teaching them about inclusivity and everything, kind of just slow changes. Nothing, if they'd say something, I wouldn't yell at them or berate them. I'd teach them about it and say why this isn't okay to say. But again, kind of like both of you said, it was my school community that kind of shaped everything. Because I did two different classes with health and personal development, I had four counterparts, which was about half of the school faculty and staff. It was a very small school. So, and I kind of worked with all of the teachers at some point. So just those little changes, and the school principal was very, very motivated, very dedicated. She even ended up running for mayor of our little village. So just kind of those things helped shape the community. So we've kind of touched upon this a few times throughout this interview. For those of you who don't know, in March of 2020, Peace Corps issued a global evacuation of all Peace Corps volunteers around the world. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, every volunteer that was in post was sent back to the United States. So Mattison, you were lucky to avoid this kind of global pandemic. So Bailey, you were in your first year of service. I was in my second, and we were both evacuated back to the United States. So how did this affect your work and your communities? And Mattison, if you're in touch with the communities, if you kind of want to touch base on anything you've heard about that.
So thankfully, Sierra Leone is a really small country and they do not have much international travel. So COVID-19 was definitely did not hit them as severe as it has hit other places. They're actually able to have in-person school already, of course, wearing masks and everything. So it was so hard to leave, so unexpected. I felt terrible because I was the only science teacher at my school. So fortunately, I left my kids with that period was just empty for them. They weren't able to get another teacher. Thankfully, the college, though, we were on our final exams that week. So I just had to have another professor grade my exams, but everything else was done. And then as for my project with my counterpart, Luis, in the women's organization, that was obviously put on hold just due to COVID and not being able to have in-person meetings. But I did give him the contact for the one village. So he was so amazing. He is so motivated, and he was like, this needs to be sustainable. This needs to continue even if you're gone. So he was really the pushing force behind that to like make sure that it still
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard some of what's going on there. I mean, it largely sounds like it does here, frankly, which I mean is horrible in a lot of ways. There's a weird, almost comforting silver lining to it, though. I feel like Peace Corps sets up this kind of divide, right? I mean, the volunteers are evacuated when something bad happens in country, and I think something very curious about this time around is that, I mean, we're doing it worse than anyone here in the United States. So it's like, it's a little bit of a trip to think about evacuating people home to safety in that case. But it's a good lesson about, I mean, stuff that affects everybody. My counterpart, I think they started the semester trying to teach digitally, same as here. That's trickier because that's much more of a class divide there. I think some of the students have zero problem doing that. They have all the tech and a reliable internet connection, and some definitely don't. So I'm not sure. I actually haven't talked to her in the last month or so. I'm not sure if they're back to some kind of in-person instruction, but I know it's roughly affecting them about how it is us.
Yeah, kind of same. It was very hard to explain to the students and the teachers and the community members that at least for Moldova and pretty much for the other posts, that we weren't being evacuated because they saw COVID-19 as a risk to us in our countries were being evacuated for a safety precaution because all of the country's borders were closing.
Yeah.
And so if something happened, we wouldn't be able to leave. So it posed a safety and security risk. So kind of just having them all overreact, not necessarily overreact, but kind of be really concerned from the pandemic and all the Americans are leaving
Right.
it was hard to explain to them that and how sudden it was too. Um, for me, I was on spring vacation when the pandemic kind of hit, so I had to get put into a quarantine when I came back, and I wasn't really able to see the students because by the time I got back, they had shut the schools down because of the pandemic. So it kind of that was a little hard. I have kept in touch with them. They're in person classes. They're all 1 meter apart, so one kid per desk. I'm not really sure how that works. I didn't think we had enough desks for that, but they're making it. They said it's working. So, and I was actually able to see a little sneak peek into the virtual learning through Facebook Messenger. They were sending the assignments through Facebook Messenger to all of the kids, and one of them, without me knowing, added me to the fifth grade class group chat. So I kept up with their assignments and kind of saw how they were doing their virtual learning. So that was cool. Unfortunately, with the project, because it was a small grants project, the funding was cut when we left because there's no longer a Peace Corps presence, so there can't be Peace Corps funds. So I'm not really sure how the project kind of unfurled after we all left. I think they were able to raise some money to continue it, but a lot of unknowns, a lot of unknowns. So we've kind of all talked a little bit about this, but maintaining contact with our communities since leaving the Peace Corps, how has that been?
So that has been like really difficult for me actually. So in Sierra Leone, people have cell phones, but a lot of people don't have smartphones. And so international calling is out the door. That is just way too expensive. I don't know how it works in your countries, but we pay like per megabyte of data that you use. So it just gets crazy. There's no phone plans. So pretty much I'm only able to keep in contact with people like my counterpart and then the principals from the high school as well as from the Canadian college. And then my neighbor Tom. So through them, I feel like I've been able to keep in contact with other people. But so Sierra Leone, when I was teaching, we only had like chalkboards. So digital learning is out the door. There are no computers at our schools. There's no technology like that. So it's made it pretty difficult to keep in contact with people.
Yeah, and I've been in touch with, I mean, as the years go by, fewer and fewer people, obviously, but I've been in touch probably with, I'd say 3 or 4 of I'll call them my favorite students, um, and my counterpart, and her daughter actually lives now in Nashville, Tennessee.
Cool.
So she's over here. She was able to visit a couple of years ago, so we met up with her in New York City and had a nice trip of it. It was pretty awesome. But yeah,
That's
no,
awesome.
my various kids are kind of dispersed throughout the world at this point, or at
Mhm.
least throughout Europe. So that's I guess that was the only sort of drawback of what I was talking about in terms of people getting skills that plug them into the international economy is they leave home. So
Yeah.
Konstantinovka does not have a lot to offer a young person that wants to do things. So there's a little bit of brain drain that goes into teaching kids things that'll take them far away. But
Mhm.
it's not. I mean, you can't reverse that for the town, really. That's a bigger ask.
Mhm. Yeah, and for me, Moldova, weirdly enough, has some of the highest DSL internet in Europe. So it doesn't make sense to me, but all most of my students, if not all, have either their own personal Facebook account or a joint family account on their parents' phone. So I'm able to keep in touch with a lot of them through Facebook, and I'll video chat with my host family. Uh, about once a month right now, but I'm hoping to do it more often and chatting with all of my counterparts and the principal. It kind of makes it a little bit a little bit easier. Okay, so kind of to wrap up our time, what's one takeaway that you'd like to others to know about this initiative, or any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Just that change takes a lot of time, and just having an open dialogue and continuous conversation, especially being like a Peace Corps volunteer. I feel like me coming in, I couldn't really do a lot of change, but it's more so like my counterparts and the people in my community that will make the real change. My presence was great for me, but like in the grand scheme of things, like I'm not going to be the one to make the change in my community.
Mhm.
Yeah, just I mean to echo that, I think Peace Corps is tremendously valuable, but I think they have to be a lot of things to a lot of people, right? I mean, they have to pitch themselves to the American taxpayer, to people in Congress, to host country nationals, and I think sometimes the message is a little bit maybe garbled in what comes through, and I think it's not like Bailey's saying, it's not you, the volunteer, you're not going to come in and fix things per se. And coming in guns blazing, it's not going to work, especially not in short periods of time. But it's still tremendously valuable. I think. I mean, the two biggest things that Peace Corps does is it's an alternative education for people that go into Peace Corps, and people come from all walks of life. I realize that, but a large bulk of Peace Corps volunteers are relatively young, fairly recently after college people. I mean, that is the mainstay of applicants. And then I think the other thing that's still really valuable is just that that cultural diplomacy, the exchange of people in the host country seeing a real, normal, relatable American making mistakes and doing everything else, and then vice versa. You're having that real contact with someone, not someone from the capital, just again normal people from a normal town somewhere. So I think those two things alone, if you never fix anything in the country, are worth the price of admission. Because I mean, if you're fighting poverty, you don't. Maybe the best way isn't to pay to fly an American to the country and live in a town and then try to fix things with grant money. Maybe the best way is you just give all the money to poor people. But nonetheless, I think Peace Corps is a huge value.
Yeah, kind of just to echo you both, just having those open conversations and kind of embracing the cultural differences and just being open-minded to learning about each other's culture and kind of having um, that sharing of the two, and kind of just so you're not, only leaving something with your communities, you're also taking something away with you from your service, and just kind of moving forward and having those hard conversations that people are sometimes too afraid to have, just sitting down sometimes over tea and just talking with your counterparts. That's basically everything Peace Corps is about, just making those small changes, and kind of echoing, not going in expecting to change something, just going in with an open mind. So thank you guys so much for joining us for this interview. Be sure to check out all of our interviews with our other change makers. Simply go to mtu.edu and enter Global and Community Engagement Conference into the search tab. Have a great day.